We need to get real about something. Shopping is not fun, especially clothes shopping. I hate going into a dressing room with 1,000,001 things hanging over my arm to try on. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's so annoying having to get in and out of all of these different items just to try them on. The mirror, that's a whole nother story. They're awful. And I end up, and I know you do too, liking nothing. Something's gotta give, and this is where Stitch Fix comes in. Stitch Fix makes clothes shopping so much easier. You get a personal stylist that sends you pieces that match your size, style, and everything's in your budget. No guesswork, no stress. Here's how it works. You take a quick style quiz, you share your size, your style and budget, and you get matched with a real human stylist who catches your vibe. It's no risk, all style. Get a personalized Fix box straight to your door and try it all on in the comfort of your home. Shipping and returns are always free, and there's no subscription required. Plus, get a free try-on for your first fix. Get started today at stitchfix.com/podcast to get $20 off your first order, and they'll waive your styling fee. That's stitchfix.com/podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Summer's almost out and fall's calling. Luckily, Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead, all under $100. Discover new arrivals from your favorite brands like Mango, Princess Polly, Wave, Free People, BDG, and more. Whether you're planning a last-minute getaway, heading back to class, or refreshing your office looks, you'll find the latest trends and beauty must-haves without breaking your budget. It's easy, too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores, and at Nordstrom.com.
This episode is brought to you by Espolón Tequila. Slow, sticky, snoozy. They call these the dog days of summer. But Espolón? They don't do boring. Welcome to the Marg Days. Espolón Tequila. 100% blue Weber agave, born to shake up your summer. Just add lime, agave, and a little attitude. Visit espolontequila.com. Espolón Tequila, 40% alcohol, volume 80 proof. Copyright 2025 Campari America, New York, New York. Drink responsibly.
Welcome to the Murder Diaries. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige. As always, if you want to listen to this episode ad-free, head over to patreon.com/themurderdiariespod.
Every year, between 1 in every 1,000 to 2,000 babies is born deaf or hard of hearing. The reasons can vary: genetics, complications during pregnancy, or factors like low birth weight. But no matter the cause, for about 90% of these children, they're born into hearing families. Families who suddenly begin a journey that they never expected. That journey often means learning an entirely new language, American Sign Language. It means navigating systems that weren't built with their children in mind. It means advocating, adapting, and opening up to a vibrant community with its own culture, its own rhythm, and its own strength. Maxine and Raymond Raffle were one such family. Their daughter, Lonnie, was diagnosed as deaf at 18 months old. From that moment forward, they walked beside her as she carved out a life that defied limitation. Lonnie embraced everything: community, friendship, love, motherhood. Her world expanded even as society tried to shrink it. Her husband was also deaf. Their children, however, were hearing, what's known as CODAs, children of deaf adults. For Lonnie's daughter, Alison, that meant stepping into the role of translator, advocate, and bridge between two worlds, sometimes before she was old enough to truly understand what that meant. Then, when Alison was just 5 years old, Lonnie disappeared. Since that day, Alison has made it her mission to be her mother's voice, just as she always was. And now, she's telling her story to you. This is a story about family, identity, and a search for truth that never stopped. Alison has made it her mission to share her mother's story. And over the years, she's spoken on several podcasts and platforms in the hopes of keeping Lonnie's memory alive and finding answers. And as our listeners know, on the Murder Diaries, we always strive to include the voices of those closest to the story. But we also understand the emotional weight that comes with retelling deep personal trauma. every interview asks survivors to return to the hardest chapter of their lives. When we spoke with Alison, she chose not to be interviewed for this episode, and we fully respect that. Instead, with her permission, we've drawn from the interviews she's previously given, as well as publicly available records and reporting. Alison graciously reviewed the research for accuracy and gave us her blessing to move forward. So what you'll hear today is shared with her care, her trust, and her enduring hope for justice. This is Lonnie's story, and the story of the daughter she was taken from 43 years ago.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
Lonnie was born Lonene Raffle on October 18, 1951, to dance instructor parents Maxine and Raymond. Nicknamed Lonnie, she was a beautiful baby, and her parents noted from a young age that she didn't respond to her name and she wasn't startled by loud sounds. They didn't think much of it at first, assuming that Lonnie was developing at a slower pace and she would eventually start responding to sound. Lonnie was their first baby, with her younger sisters arriving 5 and 13 years later, so they didn't have another baby to compare their experience with. When Lonnie was 18 months old, her parents could no longer deny that there was something wrong with their daughter's hearing. And they discovered that Lonnie was, in fact, profoundly deaf. While she may have been able to hear extremely loud noises, she couldn't hear anything happening around her in her day-to-day life. But Lonnie never let her disability stop her, and she lived life to the fullest. As a child, Lonnie engaged in activities that you'd expect any child to. She loved to play on the swings, run around and play tag, and just be outdoors. She would go to the dance studio with her parents and would join in with the classes. Many dance students didn't know she was deaf because she didn't let it stop her from doing everything a hearing person would do. And despite the age difference between Lonnie and her sisters, they were all very close. Lonnie's childhood wasn't smooth sailing, though. Her father, Raymond, was often out of work, putting a financial strain on the family. Both parents drank a lot, and the drinking led to fighting. Maxine and Raymond left the girls to fend for themselves, and they had to look after each other. This may be why they were all so close, because they were all each other had. As a teen, Lonnie attended the public high school near her home in Youngstown, Ohio. Her parents didn't want to send her to the school for the deaf, because it was further away and would require Lonnie to board there. But Lonnie's high school had a deaf classroom, where she learned to lip read and work on her speech, in addition to joining the mainstream classes with her hearing peers. When Lonnie's parents moved to Pennsylvania just before her senior year, Lonnie moved in with family so she wouldn't have to move schools. Despite having a classroom for deaf students and having deaf and hard of hearing students in the mainstream classes, Lonnie's school wasn't always the best about being inclusive. In Lonnie's senior year, the school organized a senior trip to a concert. The deaf students weren't included because it was assumed they wouldn't be able to hear the music. Now, according to Musical Vibrations, a research project from the Acoustics Research Unit at the University of Liverpool, it's a misconception that deaf people cannot or do not participate and enjoy music. And although they may not be able to hear, deaf people can use the vibrations caused by musical sounds to help them listen to music. As mentioned earlier, Lonnie never let her disability stop her from joining in with anything. And this senior trip was no exception. She appealed to the school to let the deaf students attend, and when her request was denied, she and her classmates organized a car wash to raise money so that they could buy tickets to the concert themselves. They met their fundraising goal, bought the tickets, and went to the concert. After she graduated, Lonnie moved to Pennsylvania to rejoin her family. She was hired at the factory where her mom, Maxine, worked, and worked as an assembly worker, where she excelled. Although Maxine got Lonnie the job and said she'd help her daughter out, it turned out that Lonnie was quick and accurate, and soon became more skilled at the job than her mom. The managers were soon telling Maxine that she needed to pick up the pace if she wanted to keep her job. To which Maxine told the managers that if she went, Lonnie would go too. So if they wanted to keep Lonnie, they would have to keep Maxine too. When it came to her love life, Lonnie had a boyfriend in high school. He was someone she was with for a long time, but they broke up before graduation. Lonnie was, of course, heartbroken by the breakup, and it took her a long time to move past it. But around the end of 1970, she met Bud. Clinton Rogers, better known as Bud, due to his charming nature, was hard of hearing much like Lonnie. But unlike Lonnie, he wasn't born with his disability. Until the age of 4, Bud was hearing. A serious car accident resulted in a head injury which took his hearing and required a metal plate to be put in his skull. Bud's hearing loss wasn't complete. He could still hear a little bit. Anyone who has been to a swimming pool and put their head underwater knows that you can still hear what's happening around you. It may be muffled and you don't know exactly what's going on, but you hear something. That's what Bud's hearing loss was like. As for Bud's home life, he grew up with a sister and they were close. Their relationship has been described as cute when they were young, but enabling when they were older. As a teen, Bud had troubles. He loved attention, but he didn't know when enough was enough. There was also a hint of darkness that followed him, with an animal cruelty incident in his teen years. Bud attended the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, which is widely regarded as one of the best schools for the deaf in the United States. The school was 2 hours away from his home, and he boarded at the school, only going home for major holidays. But that worked out for Bud, because home was tricky for him. Very few members of his family knew ASL, American Sign Language, so he always ended up isolated during his visits home. Once he graduated, Bud worked at a foundry that made machine parts. And it's around this time that he joined the Erie Silence Club, a social club for members of the deaf community. Now, Lonnie lived around 40 minutes from the club, and she was introduced to the club by some friends she made when she moved from Ohio. There at the club, the pair met, and it wasn't long before they were planning a wedding. The couple married on October 21st, 1972, 3 days after Lonnie turned 21. They went on to have 2 children, Alison and Aaron.
Alison has been her mom's biggest advocate and is fighting for answers and justice. She's written a book called A Daughter's Journey and Story of Resilience. She speaks at events to raise awareness for her mother's case as well. On top of all of that, she's also fighting for Lonnie's Law, which we will talk about later on.
Early in their relationship, they were loving and funny. Bud was described as charming, handsome, and kind. However, not everyone bought into Bud's charm. For example, his new mother-in-law, Lonnie's mom, Maxine. She thought something was off about Bud, and she had a bad feeling. Perhaps we can call it mother's intuition. Maxine cried when the pair announced their engagement, and again at the wedding. They weren't happy tears, though. They were tears of worry. Maxine even told Lonnie on her wedding day that she would buy her a new car if she didn't go through with the marriage. But obviously, Lonnie declined. Lonnie was in love. She had been swept off her feet and was head over heels for Bud. Alison believes that the relationship didn't have enough time for Lonnie to see Bud's true colors before getting married. Prior to their meeting, Bud had been in prison. Alison has said that she doesn't know for certain, but she's pretty sure that her mom didn't know about Bud's jail time before marrying him. And she's certain her mom's family never knew. In early 1970, Bud was arrested for an aggravated assault and battery, an attack that Alison says was a rape. Although he was sentenced to 23 months in prison, he was out in 6 for good behavior. Not long after that, he met Lonnie. Alison wrote on Facebook, "Upon being released from jail, he had to have met my mother. They were married October 21st, 1972. I don't believe she ever knew about this crime. I know her family sure didn't. And I don't believe she would have married him if she knew. In fact, They may not have ever met if he completed his measly 23-month sentence. But Lonnie didn't know about any of that. She and Bud moved into a duplex in Hayfield Township. It's in Crawford County, Pennsylvania, not far from her family. In fact, her grandparents owned the duplex and lived next door. And soon Bud started to show his true colors, allowing Lonnie to begin to see through the charm that had captivated her. While Lonnie and Bud had enough money to pay their bills, they weren't rich by any means, which made the fact that Bud had a spending problem difficult. If he saw something he wanted to buy, he would buy it. He loved technology and always wanted to have the latest gadget. He seemed to think he was entitled to spend the money on whatever he wanted to, disregarding the bills that needed to be paid. And as if Bud's spending problem wasn't hard enough for this newlywed couple, he had a temper. And he would take his frustrations out on Lonnie. Early in their marriage, she was able to calm him down. But as time went on, she was less and less able to ease his angry outbursts. Bud became possessive, controlling, and physically abusive towards Lonnie. Alison believes Bud would choke Lonnie. And although she never witnessed it, she knows for a fact that he choked her aunt, Lonnie's sister, and thinks it's reasonable to assume that he also choked Lonnie. In 1972, not long after they were married, Bud broke into a woman's car. He was arrested and ordered to pay restitution. However, he didn't take full responsibility for his actions. Instead, he blamed his childhood accident and the plate in his head, which, in his mind, reduced his culpability. Once Alison was born in 1975, Lonnie stayed at home and Bud got a second job. Bud had what you would call traditional values. He believed a mother should be at home with the children while the father earned the money. However, the family couldn't survive on one income, so Bud started working at a local bar to bridge the gap. He found other ways to make ends meet as well. And these ones, well, they weren't exactly legal. His rap sheet included charges of breaking and entering, burglary, theft of homes, motor vehicles, garages, and his work, and providing police with false reports. Additionally, he had been stealing from the bar. Bud regularly stole from the cash register. He spaced out his thievery, thinking that if it was occasional, it wouldn't be noticed. However, he was taking more than $50 every time, which management obviously started to notice. A couple of dollars short could be put down to miscounting and human error, but larger amounts were much harder to explain. Undeterred, Bud pilfered $700, which, if you were to do the math, is nearly $4,000 in today's money. And he did it all in one night by badly staging a robbery. He smashed the glass door of the bar and told management that the bar had been held up and he had been robbed at gunpoint. In Bud's story, the gunman fired a shot that went through his baseball cap but didn't hit him. And he gave the man the contents of the cash register. The police thought the story was off. They weren't buying what Bud was selling. There were glaring holes in his story, not least of which was the fact that the break-in pattern of the glass showed that it had been broken from the inside. A robber would have broken the glass from the outside, which and then would shower the bar floor with sharp shards. But the opposite was true. Bud was arrested and charged with theft of tools and robbery, and he was sentenced to 6 to 12 months in prison, as well as ordered to pay restitution to the bar. Needless to say, he was also fired. But remember, he had a second job, and that one was at a factory, which he was still allowed to work at. In fact, as part of his sentence, he had to go to work and keep earning money for the family. Lonnie was pregnant with her son Aaron by this time, and Bud played up his family responsibilities to gain leniency from the judge. Once Bud was released from jail, he didn't go back to live with Lonnie and the children right away. Instead, he stayed with his parents for a while before moving back.
Lonnie knew that the relationship wasn't healthy, and she knew it was approaching its end. She just needed to find a way to support herself and the children. So she got a part-time job cleaning at a hotel so she could start saving the money that she needed in order to leave Bud.
In November of 1980, Lonnie, Alison, and Aaron went to Lonnie's parents' house in Toledo, Ohio for Thanksgiving. And Bud was noticeably absent. Lonnie confided in her sister that she was planning on leaving him. Lonnie said that she was going to allow Bud to have Christmas with the children, and then he was going to be told to leave. However, Christmas came and went, and Bud refused to leave. He became more angry and more possessive of Lonnie, and demanded to know her whereabouts at all times, as well as who she had been with or even spoken to. Bud accused Lonnie of cheating, and he was particularly jealous of a man named Arthur, a friend of Lonnie's whom she worked with. Arthur listened to Lonnie, something Bud didn't do, and he was helping her talk through her plans to leave Bud. But that was the extent of their friendship. Lonnie wasn't cheating.
Years later, Alison received a Facebook message from Arthur's daughter saying that he never forgot Lonnie, and he spoke of his concern about what happened to her.
Since Bud wouldn't leave, Lonnie had to change tact. She was going to leave him, but she couldn't do it alone. She still didn't have enough money saved up, so she went to her dad and asked for help. He said he didn't have much and handed her three $20 bills, which would be around $215 in today's money. Lonnie then went about her day as normal. She went to work, she collected her children from the babysitter, and then she took them home. That night, she planned on telling Bud that she was leaving him and taking the children with her. But she never got the chance to leave. According to Bud, he and Lonnie argued the night of the 6th and into the morning of the 7th. This is backed up by neighbor ear witness reports of banging. However, there were a lot of arguments at the Rogers home, and banging at all hours wasn't unusual. Bud said he went to bed around 12:45 a.m., and when he woke up at 2 a.m., Lonnie still hadn't come to bed. Figuring that she was sleeping off the argument on the couch, he said he went to check. But she wasn't there. However, at this point, he didn't worry or even report Lonnie missing. Despite the fact that there was a blizzard outside, Bud woke up the children, got them dressed, did the dishes, and drove to the babysitter's house, all at 3 a.m. in a blizzard. The babysitter, Sandy, thought the situation was odd for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Lonnie was usually the one who dropped the children off, not Bud. And secondly, like I said, it was 3 a.m. and Lonnie usually dropped them off at a more sociable 8 or 8:30 a.m. Bud explained that Lonnie had gone off with another man and he was going to look for her, so he needed Sandy to watch the kids for him. Sandy and Lonnie were friends, and Sandy knew that Lonnie was planning on leaving Bud, but she had never heard about another man. Sandy said he looked very nervous the entire time, and he even asked to borrow a blanket. And when Bud returned a few hours later, sans blanket, he said he couldn't find Lonnie, so he was going to work. Sandy would have had the kids that day anyway, so they stayed with her while Bud went to work. He clocked in at 6 a.m. and worked the entire day without once mentioning that his wife had gone missing the night before. Sandy, who was deaf, waited for her daughter, who was hearing, to wake up so she could call Lonnie's parents and let them know what was going on. She didn't think Bud's story made sense. She knew Lonnie would never leave her children, and she didn't think Lonnie would leave on foot in the middle of a snowstorm. And if she had left to cool off for a while, remember, her grandparents lived next door. Why wouldn't she have gone there to get some support and space before going back for her kids? Lonnie's father and grandfather were very worried when they heard from Sandy's daughter. They went over to Lonnie's house to investigate and found the door locked, so they kicked it in. Nothing looked out of place in the home, and it actually appeared clean and tidy. Lonnie's dad knew something wasn't right, so he called the police to report his daughter missing. But the police told him that Lonnie needed to be missing for 24 hours before they would begin their investigation. And Raymond told them that the investigation would start immediately. If they wouldn't do it, he would take matters into his own hands. And upon hearing that, the police agreed to take the report and meet Raymond at the house. There, they searched the house and found Lonnie's wallet, car, keys, glasses, and hearing aids. But missing from the house were her boots, jeans, and coat, as well as a king-size pink blanket that was always draped over the couch. No evidence was collected during this search or at any later time. The police waited with Raymond until Bud arrived home. This was partly for Bud's safety, since Raymond said he was gonna beat the out of Bud when he got home. Bud had collected the children on his way home and arrived at the house to find the police, his father-in-law, and grandfather-in-law waiting for him. Raymond and Lonnie's grandfather confronted Bud, who quickly became angry that his in-laws were in his home, and a yelling match ensued. Bud told the police that Lonnie up and left in the middle of the night, and he suggested that she had run off with another man. Raymond and Lonnie's grandfather were confused about how Bud could know she ran off if she didn't leave a note or tell him that's what she was doing. When the police asked Bud to empty his pockets, which was likely a routine request for safety, they found 3 $20 notes, a total of $60. Now, if you remember earlier in the episode, I mentioned that Raymond had given Lonnie all the money he could spare to help her leave, which was the exact amount that Bud had in his wallet. While Bud said Lonnie had given it to him to pay bills, Bud had a history of not paying his debts. Instead, people wondered if Bud had taken that money from Lonnie. Police attempted an initial search outside the house, but the blizzard conditions made it a fool's errand. While police and volunteers searched in the freezing conditions for any sign of Lonnie, Bud sat at the window and watched. He didn't offer to help, have the house as a warming center, make hot drinks. Nothing.
While it was reported in the newspapers that Bud was cooperating with police, in reality, he wasn't able to be properly interviewed due to lack of interpreters. Police would attempt to question him, but could only get so far without an ASL interpreter. As Alison said in an interview with another podcast, it really gives a false impression of his willingness to be helpful.
When Paige and I started this podcast, we thought it would be simple. Just hit record and talk. But suddenly we were wearing all the hats. Producer, editor, designer, marketer. It got overwhelming fast. I wish we had something like Shopify from the start. For millions of entrepreneurs, Shopify is that business partner, helping you launch, manage, and grow all in one place. It simplifies that hard stuff so you can focus on what you actually love doing. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Rode and Skims to brands just getting started. And you too can get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. You can accelerate your content creation as well, because Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. You can also get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you by easily creating email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or even strolling. And probably best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/murderdiaries. Go to shopify.com/murderdiaries, shopify.com/murderdiaries. Because Aaron was just 3 at the time of his mom's disappearance, he has very few memories. However, Alison was 5, and the events of January 7th, 1981 are etched in her mind. Alison shared what she remembers in her Facebook group. She remembers being woken up by Bud around 3 a.m. and being told to get dressed, and Bud saying that, "Mommy left us for another man." Once at the babysitter's, Alison remembers Sandy's daughter calling Raymond to let him know what had happened, and then spending the day at Sandy's house. She said that her father picked her and her brother up and drove them home as if it was a normal day and nothing was out of the ordinary. Once at home, she recalls the yelling between her father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and being told to go into the other room, which was the living room. Alison, a protective big sister, tried to distract Aaron with the Bee Gees record player she had gotten for Christmas. But it wasn't loud enough because she heard what was going on in the other room. She heard the police ask Bud to empty his pockets. She also heard Raymond scream, "I gave Lonnie $60 yesterday. Where did you get that money?" followed by Bud saying Lonnie gave it to him to pay a bill. She also remembers things going quiet until the police instructed Raymond and Lonnie's grandfather to leave the apartment. With no blood or other evidence that Lonnie was hurt or in danger, police quickly decreased resources assigned to the case. They were treating it as a woman who had left on her own accord, so there wasn't anything to follow up on. Alison and Aaron spent the rest of their childhood bouncing between being in the custody of Bud, family, friends, and the state. Since Bud was never officially named as a suspect, there were no restrictions placed on his ability to have custody of the children. However, Bud was neglectful and abusive to the children, and they were often removed for safety reasons. No sooner had they returned to Bud's care, social services would be called to remove them. After Lonnie disappeared, the kids went to stay with their maternal Aunt Gleen in Toledo. They stayed with her for around a week before Bud showed up and took them away. Gleen called the police, but there was nothing they could do. Bud was their custodial parent and was therefore within his rights to take the children. However, Bud didn't take them home. Instead, he took them to his sister Laura and then left them there. Laura advised Bud to get a lawyer to stop Lonnie's family attempting to gain custody or visitation rights. And from then on, Alison and Aaron weren't allowed to see their mom's family. Their maternal family sent gifts and cards regularly, but they were never given to the children. It wasn't until Alison was an adult that she was able to reconnect and discovered that years of mail was withheld from her and her brother. They lived with Laura for 2 years, with Bud visiting once every month to take them out and drop them back off at Laura's. She and her husband had 4 children, so the addition of 2 extra would have put a strain on the household. While that wasn't Alison's fault in the slightest, she could tell that her aunt, uncle, and cousins weren't exactly thrilled with her and Aaron being there. After 2 years of living with Laura, Bud picked the children up and took them home. The first of many homes. Because Bud didn't pay his bills and would have to move often. At first, they were elated. And why wouldn't they be? For the past 2 years, Bud was this fun guy who would take them out and spoil them once a month. They assumed that they were just headed for full-time fun. That, however, couldn't have been further from the truth. Bud had a girlfriend and the couple argued in front of the children often. The girlfriend routinely complained to Alison about how abusive Bud was, and once said that Bud had been responsible for Lonnie's disappearance. Bud himself never denied his involvement. When it was spoken about, which was rare, Bud would say things like, "Hard to find, can't prove." Bud didn't just have one girlfriend, and he would often leave Alison and Aaron alone while he went to stay with his other girlfriend. With their father nowhere to be found, Alison became Aaron's primary caregiver, taking on the responsibility of feeding him, getting him to school, and keeping him as safe as she could. But she was only 8 years old, and she was taking on the parental responsibilities for a 6-year-old. When both children were in elementary school, Alison could ensure Aaron was getting to school. However, when Alison started at middle school in the 5th grade, she needed to leave before Aaron, which meant he was responsible for his morning routine and getting to school himself. He was often late for the bus and oddly dressed, which alerted the school to the fact that something was wrong. As mandated reporters, the school called CPS, and a social worker went to the house to talk to Bud. But there was no ASL interpreter, so Alison had to do the job. The social worker told Bud through Alison that he wasn't to leave the children alone again. However, the children were allowed to remain in his care. CPS was involved again soon after when they visited the school and saw that the children hadn't been picked up. At this point, they were taken into foster care and returned to Laura. They stayed with their aunt for a year this time before Bud was given custody again. While Bud seemed to have picked up a few parenting tips in their absence, he still left them alone for days at a time, with Alison in charge of her brother's welfare. While the social workers still visited, they seemed oblivious to the neglect that continued. As Alison got older, the neglect turned to violence. She wondered if it's because she reminded Bud of her mother, and that angered him. While Aaron was spared, Alison was frequently hit and slapped, and Bud was constantly threatening to send her away. Alison told the social worker about a time that Bud had hit her so hard, she fell to the ground with the force. The social worker confronted Bud, using Alison to interpret the conversation. And while Alison carefully interpreted, leaving some parts out that she knew would enrage her father, Bud could still read lips, so he picked up on the bits that weren't translated. So when the social worker left, Bud flew into a rage. Alison was able to go and stay with a friend after that. She hated leaving Aaron, but she knew Aaron would be physically safe. Once the social worker found out that Alison wasn't living with Bud, she was taken to live with Laura again while Aaron stayed with Bud. This stint at Laura's lasted 2 years before she was back in Bud's home, back in harm's way. During her childhood, Alison recalls that her mother was rarely mentioned. Bud would occasionally bring her up to say something nasty about her, like saying she ran off with another man or didn't love her children. But Alison and Aaron knew not to bring her up. Sometimes Bud would say that Lonnie was in Florida or went to be somewhere else. Lonnie's family would try to engage with Bud and gain information, but he would tell them to go away or say he couldn't understand them because of the language barrier. When Alison was just 14, her father Bud made a decision that still shocks those who hear it. It was Aaron's birthday. Bud, his new girlfriend, and Aaron rode in the cab of his pickup truck, while Alison was told to ride in the flatbed. It was freezing outside. Sleet was coming down and she had no protection from the cold. Supposedly, they were headed to a restaurant for dinner. And at one point, Alison knocked on the window, trying to get her father's attention. But instead of letting her into the cab, Bud pulled into the parking lot of a police station. Inside, he brought Alison up to the front desk, and using sign language, he told the officer, "Bad girl, I'm finished with her." There was no warning, no explanation. He just left his 14-year-old daughter at the police station like she was no longer his responsibility. The officer at the station was taken aback. This isn't how things are done. You can't just drop off your child at a police station and walk away. But Bud refused to take Alison back with him. And with nowhere to go, the officers tried to help Alison find someone, anyone who could take her in. She called Laura, but Laura refused to come. Alison hadn't spoken to her mother's side of the family in nearly a decade, so reaching out to them didn't feel like an option. As she sat there trying to think of what to do next, she slipped her hand into her pocket and felt something. It was a piece of paper, a note from that very day. Her guidance counselor, Judy Dinsmore, had quietly handed it to her earlier, sensing something wasn't right. On that paper was Judy's home phone number and a message. "Call if you need help." The officer dialed the number and Judy answered. She came straight to the station to pick Alison up. At the Dinsmore family, Alison was finally safe. She was cared for. She was welcome. It was the first time she had felt all three of those things since her mother had been in her life, and she needed it now more than ever. The Dinsmores filed for temporary custody and were granted 6 months to give everyone time to figure things out. When they applied for permanent custody, Bud showed up to the first hearing. He didn't object, and he didn't show up for the second one. In the end, the Dinsmores were granted full custody, and none of Alison's biological relatives contested it. Her younger brother Aaron stayed behind with Bud. What followed for him was a painful cycle, being kicked out, staying with friends, then returning home. Eventually, he left for good and never went back. Judy Dinsmore stepped into Alison's life at exactly the moment she needed someone most. She didn't try to replace Alison's mother, Lonnie, and Alison respected her deeply for that. Instead, Judy honored Lonnie's memory. She encouraged Alison to talk about her mom, to hold on to whatever memory she had. But there were also practical matters that had to be faced. One of them was the question of Lonnie's legal status. After nearly a decade with no contact, Lonnie was still considered missing, not deceased. And that meant Alison and Aaron weren't eligible for certain support, including the Social Security benefits that could help fund their education. It wasn't an easy decision. Declaring her mother legally dead felt final, like letting go of a hope that Lonnie might someday return. But Judy helped Alison reframe it. This wasn't giving up on her mom's memory. It was a way for Lonnie, through that process, to still help her children. And with that in mind, Alison filed the paperwork. Soon after it was approved, Bud made his own move. He cashed in a life insurance policy he'd taken out on Lonnie.
Once Alison was 18, Judy helped her to contact the police about having another look into Lonnie's case. The police told Alison that without evidence, a body, or a confession, the case against Bud was circumstantial, and that wasn't enough for an arrest warrant. Alison has spent years asking the DA to bring charges against Bud. However, they won't unless they know they can win the case, and they don't think that they can win without a body.
In 2009, Alison got a call from one of Bud's ex-girlfriends. The woman said she had information and wanted to meet in person. It took courage for Alison to agree. This was someone who had been around during the years of abuse, someone who knew what was happening and never stepped in to stop it. Still, Alison showed up, hoping there might finally be something, anything that could help hold Bud accountable. But the meeting was a disappointment. The woman didn't bring evidence. What she offered were personal thoughts, feelings, and opinions about what had happened. Alison listened, but she knew the truth. Feelings don't win criminal cases. Evidence does. And once again, there was none. Then in 2021, Alison traveled to Erie, Pennsylvania, determined to learn more about the original investigation into her mother's disappearance. She met with the local police department and asked for details about how the case was handled. That's when she learned something that stopped her cold. Bud had never been formally interviewed. The reason? The department didn't have access to a certified interpreter. According to policy, police interviews require interpreters with specific qualifications. And at the time, they didn't have anyone who met the standard. Decades had passed. And one of the most critical steps in any missing persons case, interviewing the person closest to the victim, was never taken. Around this time, Alison turned to the internet to push for answers. She created a Facebook group to raise awareness about Lonnie's case and connect with others who might know something. In the early days, before the group was set to private, something unexpected happened. Bud joined. Alison responded with a post, dry, a bit tongue-in-cheek, welcoming him to the group. But Bud didn't leave. He stayed. Since launching the group, Alison has been contacted by people who knew both Lonnie and Bud, many from the local deaf community. One woman, a friend of Lonnie's and a fellow member of the deaf club, shared something alarming. After confronting Bud about Lonnie's disappearance, he attacked her, choked her. She took out a restraining order, and the incident got Bud banned from the club entirely. It was another piece of a much larger puzzle, one that Alison is still trying to put together. One day, another message came through. This time, it was from Richard, a man who had once been friends with Bud. And Richard had something to share. A story he'd been told by Marie, one of Bud's ex-girlfriends. Marie had dated Bud after Lonnie disappeared. She told Richard about a strange and unsettling experience she had with him. Bud had taken her for a drive to a wooded area off Church Street. Once there, he parked the car, got out, and walked alone into the trees, leaving Marie sitting in the car, confused and uneasy. And when he returned, she asked a question that had clearly been weighing on her. "Is Lonnie out there?" Bud's reaction was immediate and frightening. He exploded in anger, warning her that if she ever brought it up again, she'd end up out there with Lonnie. Marie was shaken. She later told Richard, "If I ever go missing, look on Church Street." Richard took that seriously. He went to the police and reported everything Marie had told him, but nothing came of it. Sure, it was documented, written down in the case file, but no one followed up, no search, no interview with Marie, nothing. Years later, Alison spoke with Richard herself over a Google Meet call. Because Richard is deaf, they signed to each other. Alison translated in real time, recording both video and audio of the conversation. With that information in hand, Alison went back to the police. She asked them to search the wooded area on Church Street, this time with cadaver dogs. They said no. But Alison didn't stop there. She posted in her Facebook group about the story, and a woman reached out, an independent contractor who sometimes worked with law enforcement. She had access to cadaver dogs and handlers and was willing to help. The first time the dogs searched the woods, both alerted to the same tree. A few weeks later, they went back. And again, both dogs indicated on the same tree. Months later, a third search was conducted. Same tree, same result. Only after that third confirmation did the police agree to search the area. But in the end, nothing was found. Still, for Alison, it was another step forward, another piece of the story that wouldn't be buried quietly. Still searching for answers, Alison took matters into her own hands, again. After the repeated alerts from the cadaver dogs at the same tree on Church Street, she hired a backhoe. She got in touch with the property owner, explained the situation, and received permission to take the tree down. When the day came, members of the community showed up to help. People brought tools, and together they worked to bring the tree down carefully, keeping the root system intact as it was pulled from the soil. Once the roots were fully exposed, the dogs returned and alerted again. This time, directly at the base. A tree expert later told Alison that after 40 years, it's possible the tree had more or less absorbed what remained. So if Lonnie was buried there, nature may have taken over, and there might be nothing left to find. As a result, Alison is now exploring whether DNA can be extracted from the root system. So far, there aren't any clear answers. All in all, 2021 became a turning point, not just in the case, but in Alison's pursuit of the truth. That year, she did more than pull up a tree. She spoke with police, pushed the case back into the spotlight, and obtained 62 pages of criminal records related to Bud from the Crawford County Clerk of Courts. She had always known he was violent, but the extent of it, documented in report after report, was something that she hadn't fully seen until then. Also in 2021, Lonnie's story aired on local television. And for the first time in over 4 decades, Bud was publicly named a person of interest. The case was officially reclassified from a civil missing persons case to an open criminal investigation. In an interview with Erie News Now that July, Alison said, "I believe my father is responsible, and I believe that people know something that might help convict him." Alison has publicly stated that she believes Bud choked Lonnie in a fit of rage, likely after realizing she was planning to leave him. Choking fits Bud's known pattern of violence, and it could explain why there wasn't any blood. Alison doesn't necessarily think it was premeditated, but she does believe it ended in death. And she suspects that after dropping Alison off at the babysitter that night, Bud may have been driving around, searching for a place to hide the body. Later, she thinks, he came back and moved Lonnie to a more hidden location. To this day, Alison is still looking for the truth, still asking the questions that no one else ever did.
There were rumors that the foundry where Bud worked could have been where he disposed of Lonnie's body, but it's been thoroughly searched and it's not thought to be a credible claim.
By August of 2021, Alison was speaking publicly about her mother's case, this time with WKYC. In that interview, she shared a belief that has guided much of her work, that the key to solving Lonnie's disappearance may lie within the deaf community. It's a close-knit group, especially in a small town, and Alison believes there are people who know something, but who are too afraid to speak. Bud's reputation for violence, especially within that community, has kept many silent. Alison suspects that when Bud is no longer a threat, once he's gone, some of those people may finally come forward. In 2022, Alison took another brave step and self-published a book. It's called A Daughter's Journey and a Story of Resilience. In it, she writes not just about Lonnie's disappearance, but about the years of living in a home still shaped by that trauma. You can find the book on Amazon, and if you want a deeper understanding of Alison's experience, we highly recommend reading it. She shares far more than we could ever cover in a single episode. Alison has also co-written a children's book with her son called Rudy the Resilient Rhinoceros. It was his idea, born from a desire to help his mom in her ongoing search for the truth. For Alison, this journey isn't just about finding answers. It's about resilience. Hers, her mother's, and now her son's too. At the time of this recording, Lonnie's case remains stalled. Alison has been told that the Pennsylvania State Police are stretched thin, that they simply don't have the time or resources to actively investigate the case right now. But Alison isn't waiting around. She's planning to put up billboards, both in Erie and in the town where Bud currently lives. She's also creating advocacy cards and intends to distribute them locally, keeping Lonnie's story visible and impossible to ignore. In addition to her on-the-ground efforts, Alison is working towards something bigger, a legislative change. She's drafted what she calls Lonnie's Law, a proposed piece of legislation that would give families the right to access their loved ones' case files after 20 years. She was inspired by her own experience. She's requested Lonnie's file multiple times and has been denied each time. The Pennsylvania State Police cite policy. It's an open criminal investigation, and by their rules, that means the file remains sealed. Alison and her family argue that for most of its existence, this case wasn't criminal. It was considered civil. For 40 years. And only recently was it reclassified. They believe that with access to the full case file, they could connect dots that investigators may have missed because they knew Lonnie. They understand the people and the history in a way that outsiders simply don't. Here's how Alison explains Lonnie's Law. It would propose that a case file may remain sealed and withheld from the family of a victim for a period of 20 years. After 20 years of active investigative work with no successful resolution to the case, Lonnie's Law would then require law enforcement to allow the family an opportunity to read the case file in a secured setting. No portion of the file may be removed or altered in any way, but the family would be permitted to take private notes. At its core, Lonnie's Law is about transparency. It recognizes that, after 2 decades, there's often nothing active about a cold case. And families like Alison's deserve the opportunity to understand what's been done and what hasn't. As Alison puts it, the loss of a family member under such circumstances is hard enough, but forbidding the family to view the case records after 20 years is excruciating. It prolongs the unfathomable pain of ambiguous loss. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about giving families a chance to grieve, to understand, and maybe just maybe, to help find answers that have been out of reach for far too long. You can help Alison raise awareness about her mother's case a few ways. 1, by joining her Facebook group, Justice for Lonene. 2, signing the Lonnie's Law petition. 3, sharing the missing poster, which is available on the Facebook group. And 4, by purchasing Alison's book. All the links will be in the show notes. If you have any information that could help solve Lonnie's case, please call the Pennsylvania State Police at 814-332-6911. That's 332-6911.
Come back Monday for an all-new episode of our unscripted segment and Thursday for another episode of Case Coverage. Follow us on all of our socials at The Murder Diaries Pod. And until then,
Stay safe.
bye.